Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining today's workshop. I'm Meghna, the co-founder at Teen Chapter. We at Teen Chapter are on an aim to build a global holistic teenagers community where we not only focus on internships, providing internships, courses, webinars, sessions, etc., but we also feature teen startups, youth-led organizations, and teen entrepreneurs on our platform. And today we have Armita Hosseini from Canada, and she's an incoming freshman at Stanford University. And she's an entrepreneur, author, public speaker, and she is also an active advocate of financial and economic education for youth. In 2020, she published her first book, Roadmap to Financial Literacy, An Introduction to Personal Finance for Teenagers, and later partnered with a nonprofit organization called Operation Economics International to donate 300 copies of her books to undeserved schools in San Marcos, California. She is also the founder of Empower Econ, an organization which hosts virtual financial literacy sessions and camps for teenagers. They have organized 5 financial literacy camps and entrepreneurship camps for over 300 participants from 36 countries across 5 different continents to date, and published an economics book titled Economics from a Youth's Perspective, an Introduction for Teenagers. And Armita believes that increasing access to financial education involves helping youth develop both knowledge and skills, can aid them in making better decisions about the futures, and envisions a future where every student is offered a one-semester personal finance course. Armita, it's so great to have you here, and that's an amazing achievement. And we can't wait to see what you have in store for us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for the introduction and also for inviting me. I'm really excited to speak to everyone today. I'll start sharing my screen now with the presentation. And first, I'll talk about personal finance. So as was mentioned just now, I'm the founder of Empower Econ, and one of the main things that we do is we organize financial and economic education camps for students. So these are 3-day events where students come in and they hear from different guest speakers, they listen to different presentations and also take part in different activities. And in addition to that, I've also published my own book, Roadmap to Financial Literacy, that goes over the topics that we covered today, but a lot more in depth, and it also covers additional topics and additional investment types. And Empower Econ has also been featured on Forbes for its work. So today I'm going to be talking about 4 specific areas. The first is investing, second is credit, the next one is loans, and finally I'm going to be ending with budgeting. Beginning with investing, I'll talk a bit about why you should invest and what benefits you can get from it, as well as 2 main investment types, mutual funds and stock investing. Mutual funds are also kind of similar to index funds, so we'll also touch on that a little bit. Firstly, the reasons that you should invest are listed on the screen. It's used to grow your money, save for retirement, reach your financial goals, and start and expand a business. Because if you just leave your money in a savings account, it accrues interest of about 1 to 2% a year, typically around 1%. And that's just not enough for your money to compound over time by the time that you need it for retirement or if you want to purchase a mortgage. And so because of that, people invest to grow their money much faster and at a higher rate. And when they're about to retire, they would have had a lot more money saved in their account if they had invested in a lot of different securities and different options. So one really good investment type is mutual funds. And essentially what a mutual fund is that it's a bundle of a lot of different investments, and the specifics of the management is done by a fund manager. So when you want to invest in a mutual fund, you make decisions about what you generally want to invest in. Maybe you're interested in the food industry, so you're looking at investments from McDonald's and companies similar to that nature. Or maybe you're interested in the automobile industry or commodities and gold. So depending on that, you pick the category, and then a fund manager goes in and specifically decides what securities go in there, which companies specifically you will be investing in. Then the money that you've put in gets pooled with a lot of different people's money, and it's collectively managed by that fund manager. And that's why it's called a mutual fund, because it's not just your money that's being managed, but it's money from tens or even hundreds of individuals. It's being actively managed, which is a benefit of mutual funds because there is a professional who is in charge of your investments and is constantly checking the market and checking your securities to see how they're doing. And it's also a great investment type because it is safe, meaning that you will not suffer a great risk if you invest in mutual funds because it's typically diversified in a lot of different areas. It's liquid, meaning that if tomorrow you decide that you don't want to be investing in a mutual fund anymore, you can easily get out of it. And this is different to a non-liquid investment such as a house that has a much lengthier process to find a buyer and eventually sell that house if you no longer want to have a real estate investment. And finally, mutual funds do have a relatively high rate of return, meaning that you will get a high interest rate on them and be able to make money by just having your money sit in the mutual fund over the long term. Some benefits that come with mutual funds is that number one, because it's diverse, there is less risk involved. So diversity is a key idea when you're investing, and it basically means to not put all of your eggs in one basket. You should always look at different investment types and put your money in many different areas so that if one type of investment ends up doing really poorly, you haven't put all of your money there to suffer a great loss. In addition to that, investments, again, are managed by a professional. And this is really helpful for people who are especially beginners and they don't know too much about investing. And so they don't want to have to directly manage their funds and constantly be looking at like the specifics and kind of building off of that. It's very low maintenance and convenient for the investor because most of the job is really being done by the fund manager and you don't really have to go into the nitty gritty of how the mutual fund is operating. However, with that and with any investment, of course, there are downsides. So one of the main downsides that comes with mutual funds is that you have a lack of control over your investments because number one, you only get to pick the general area that you want to invest in, but not the specific investment. So if there's a certain stock that you really want to invest in, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be in the mutual fund that you get. And it's also not being managed by you. And so the fund manager would kind of be doing their own thing and you might not be happy about that, which is kind of a downside. There can also be too much diversity because even though it's good to put your money in a lot of different areas, if you invest in too many things and a few of your investments end up doing really well, but you have diversified so much that your money is in a lot of different areas, you may not benefit as much from the rates of return that those better investments offer. And finally, there are high fees that come with mutual funds that kind of counters the high rate of return because these are being managed by fund managers who need to get income for the work that they're doing. And so the fees that go off of your mutual fund actually contribute to a portion of the income of the fund manager, which is why it results in higher fees. Next, I want to talk about stocks. So when we say the term stock, we basically say that you bought ownership in a company. The stock is essentially an ownership in a corporation, and the company that you have invested in is able to grow and make a profit from your investment. Along with a solid business plan, any business plan or any business needs capital in order to be able to grow and expand its operations. For instance, companies such as Walmart, Amazon, and Apple were able to grow partly because of your investments or the investment of other people in their stocks and in their market. Now, a share is a unit of measurement or a unit of ownership, and this is different from stocks because stocks are essentially just ownership in a corporation, whereas the share is the unit that you have from that company, and different companies can have different prices. For instance, for Apple, it's sometimes around $145, whereas for Twitter, it's around $34, and this can fluctuate. However, just because a stock's price is super high or if it's super low, it does not necessarily mean that it has higher value. So because some companies, for example, their stock can be $500, but they can take that and divide that and make that into 5 shares of $100 because that makes it a lot more accessible for investors. So a higher price doesn't always signal a better deal that you're getting. And finally, there's also the market, and this is where the buying and selling is occurring. So buying is, of course, more straightforward. You go, you pick a stock and you purchase it. But with selling, there are 2 entities involved. If you want to sell a stock, you are the buyer and you're the person who's giving the stock, and then there has to be a seller. And all of this within the market happens within a few seconds. It's a very fast-paced action. However, there can also be some delays. So the stock exchange allows individuals to wait for 3 days to either make or receive the money that they need to pay for the stocks, or they also provide them with the opportunity to wait until the person who owns the stock hands over the certificate. So again, as I talked about, buying and selling in the market occurs within seconds, and it's a very fast-paced process. And it happens online. Typically, you go to online brokers, which is one of the reasons that it is quite a fast-paced process. Now I want to talk about short selling, and this is an interesting concept that happened with GameStop about this time or a few months ago last year. And essentially short selling is when an investor is profiting off of shares of a company that have been suffering a loss. And so an example of this I can give is I go to my friend and I borrow an eraser from my friend, and that eraser is worth $2. Then I go and I sell that eraser to someone else, and I still owe my friend the eraser, but I've just sold the eraser to someone else and gotten $2 from it. Then I wait a few days and the eraser actually becomes $1.50. When it's at a lower price, I purchase the eraser and then I give it back to my friend. So in this entire transaction, I've made 50 cents just by holding on to the eraser, selling it to someone else, and then buying it back at a lower price. And so that's the concept of short selling. And high profit, high loss is basically betting on a company's loss. Now there are two main different types of stocks. There's common and preferred, and as the name of the former suggests, common stock is more common when people are investing. And what common stocks are is that they give voting rights to individuals for the board of directors, so you can kind of vote on who's going to be on the leadership team in a company when the time comes for a company to decide its leadership. However, there is no payout, meaning that if the company were to suddenly collapse or not do that well, you would be one of the last people to get your money back and you would have suffered a loss. However, for companies that have common stocks to incentivize people to invest in their company, what they do is they hand out quarterly dividends. And this is about 1 to 5% of your individual investment. And this is just given out for holding on to the stock. So if you hold on to the stock for 1 year, you would have made a few dollars just by having that investment. And this kind of incentivizes people to continue investing in that company. At the same time, there are preferred stocks, which have no voting rights, which is different to the common stocks. However, there is a payout. So if the company were to do really poorly, you would be able to get your money back. But many people choose to not invest in this type of investment because it comes with a premium. So you would actually have to pay money in order to be able to have that stock, in order to get the privilege of getting a payout if the company did not do that well. And so with common stocks, you're actually making money by just holding on to the stock, whereas with a preferred stock, you're giving money away just for holding on to it. Now I want to talk a bit about entering the market as a teen, because I know that's something that a lot of teenagers are interested in. So unless you're 18 or older, you can't enter the market on your own and be the sole investor. However, there are several different ways to do this. One thing that you can do is you can start a custodial account. And this is actually something that we do with one of Empower Econ's partners. There's Bumper Investing, which was an app that's actually created by a student at Stanford University. And through Bumper, you can have a custodial account and create your own stocks account and start investing in stocks. And as you're investing, it's going to give you guides and manuals on how to invest. It teaches you everything. So not only are you gaining real world experience, but you're also learning about it. So that is kind of one of the options that's out there. But you could also pitch to your parents to contribute to their own accounts. So you could research about the market, help them out with their own investments. And if none of the above work, then the best thing that you could do now is practicing and learning as much as that you can. So for instance, you can take part in online simulations from the stock market to gauge how it is to actually invest. You can watch YouTube videos, you can read books. And if you, learn and also apply that to at least taking part in simulations, when the time comes for you to actually invest, you're going to feel a lot more confident and you're going to know what you're doing as you're walking into the entire investment scene. And so that was my presentation on investments. And now I'm going to segue on to credit, loans, and finally budgeting. So what is credit and why is it important? Credit is essentially the ability to borrow money to make purchases at a later date. And it helps you take out loans for purchases such as a car, so an auto loan, or a mortgage for a home. And it's important because it impacts the interest rate that you receive on that loan. But it's not only viewed by people who want to provide you money to make purchases, but it's also viewed by people such as landlords, insurance companies, and prospective employers that use it to make decisions about whether they want to hire you or whether they want to give you a piece of land. Now, kind of building off of credit, what is a credit card and how do you use it to your benefit? Credit cards are super important, but often they get a bad reputation because sometimes people don't use them responsibly and they end up being in hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of debt. And because they have really high interest rates, it takes years and years and a lot of unnecessary money to pay off. So kind of a credit card essentially gives you the ability to make purchases without making an immediate payment. So let's say you go to the grocery store and you're like, I want to buy a bag of groceries and use your credit card to pay for it. When you use your credit card, you're not actually paying with your own money and there's no money that's being taken out of your account in that moment. Instead, you're kind of going into debt for it and it goes on your credit card balance. But if you pay it off on or before the payment due date, you will pay absolutely zero interest on that money. So even though credit cards allow you to make purchases that you necessarily don't have the money to pay for, you shouldn't use it to make purchases that you don't have the money to pay for. Because if by the end of the month you can't pay something back, you're going to accrue a lot of interest on it. And 9 out of 10 times, or almost always, the purchase that you've made is probably very unnecessary. And so responsible use of credit cards means that you're only using that money to buy things that you have the money to pay for, and you're not going into debt to buy things that you cannot afford. And so by doing this, you're just using your credit card as a vehicle to build your financial health rather than as a tool to make purchases to get you in debt. And in that way, it's super beneficial because if you don't have a credit card, then you wouldn't be able to you wouldn't be able to purchase homes or get cars because you need that credit card in order. So with a credit card, you are essentially just using it to demonstrate that you're able to responsibly handle loans, not that you're using it to buy things that you cannot afford. And so a credit score is a number that ranges from $300 to $850. And it's built, or 300 to 850, and this is determined by your credit card as well as different types of credit that you have, but predominantly your credit card. And so essentially it plays an important role in determining whether you get approved for loans. And this is kind of similar to your GPA in high school. When you have a certain grade and you're applying to universities, they look at that grade to see if you're able to handle the work and academic rigor at their institution. And in a similar way, credit scores are used to signal that kind of information, but about how responsible you are with your money and paying back money that you've borrowed. And so on the right-hand side, you can kind of see a range of what is a good to excellent credit score as well as what are bad credit scores. Typically, you want to be above 700, but the higher you are to 850, of course, that's better, and it takes time and experience in order to be able to develop. So now I'll delve a little bit deeper into the components that actually make up your credit score and how you can maximize your credit score and do the best that you can on your part to have the highest score. So the first and one of the most important portions is your payment history because it makes up 35% of your overall score. It basically factors in the total number of on-time payments that you've made. So it takes the total number of on-time payments and divides it by all of the payments that you've made to give your percentage paid on time. And this determines whether you've paid your balance off on time on or before the payment due date every single month that you've had your credit card for. So if I've had a credit card for 10 months and I've paid it back 9 times on time, but I haven't paid it back 1 time on time, it's going to be at 90% paid on time. And while that is good, it's not excellent. And so you want to be as close to 100% as you can. And of course, that just comes with buying things that you know you can't afford. So maybe just a bag of groceries at the store, or if you're going to the gas station, rather than making very long-term and large purchases. The next portion that makes up your credit score is the credit utilization ratio. And this is the second biggest component, which also takes up 35%. And it basically determines how much of the credit that's available to you you've used. Because even with a credit card, although it provides loans, it's not an unlimited amount, and there's always a ceiling on how much you can spend. It can be $500, $1,000, or even $10,000, depending on how long you've had your credit card for and your seniority. And so when you are using your credit card, they determine the percentage of it that you're using. So if I have like a $500 limit and I'm spending $250 every month, they just determine that I've spent 50% of my credit limit, but they don't know how much money I've spent. And so to a credit bureau or to like a potential lender, all they see is that you've used 50% of your limit, not that you've only used $250 and it isn't that much. So you need to always be mindful of what the maximum amount is and how much you are spending depending on the limit that you have in order to have the highest ratio. And if there are some times where you need to use your credit card to make some very large purchase, you need to go in the next day and just pay that money off immediately, because that way it won't impact your credit score or nearly as much. So now I want to talk about the different types of credit. There are three main different types of credit, and this is important because it kind of branches off of the only credit cards thing, and it shows how different types of credit can actually impact your credit score, because lenders want to see that you've been able to pay off different types of loans responsibly in the past. Because if they're just seeing credit cards, that's good, but it doesn't show how you're able to handle different types of loans that you have. But by factoring in a lot of different things, you're able to improve your credit score. So one of these is revolving credit accounts, which is basically your credit card, and you can borrow money whenever you want up to a certain limit, and you can pay it back at a later date. It doesn't have to be by the payment due date, but of course you will accrue interest, and that is not a good idea. But the second type that we have are open credit accounts. And this is like a cell phone plan where you can borrow money at any time up to a certain limit, but you have to absolutely pay it off on time each month. If you don't, your cell phone plan will be cut off. And finally, there are also installment credit accounts, and these are like different types of loans, like mortgages, auto loans, and essentially these have payments that you have to make towards them on a regular basis. Now, there's also length of credit history, which is a little bit higher than your types of credit. And this is essentially how long you've had all of your credit cards for, because a lender is not just concerned that you're using your credit card responsibly for 2 months. They want to see that you've been responsible over a long period of time. So if two people go to the bank and they want to apply for a mortgage, and one of them has had their credit card for 6 years and one of them has had it for 6 months, the bank is more likely to accept the person who's had it for 6 years, because it shows that they've been responsible with their money over a long period of time, which shows that they're a lot more trustworthy. And this is also, again, applies with grades in school. Many universities look at all 4 years of your high school because they want to see how you've been able to perform over the long term rather than just looking at a few marks, because that is a much shorter period of time. And there's also hard inquiries, and this is essentially when your credit report is checked. So if you want to open a new credit card, or if you want to apply for a different type of loan, the lender will take out your credit report and your credit score, and we'll look at all of it to see whether you qualify. And the action of doing this is called a hard inquiry, and this causes your score to drop by a few points, but this is not permanent, and it restores back to usual after 24 to 36 months, so 2 to 3 years, depending on where you are. So that was about credit cards, and building off of credit cards, now I'm going to be talking about loans, because credit cards are kind of the stepping stones to applying for and receiving loans. So I'll talk about what loans are, why they're important, and some different types. So loans are essentially when you lent money, often by a financial institution like a bank, and then you pay that money back over a certain period by making smaller payments. There are two different components that come with your loans. There's the principal, which is the initial amount of money that you've borrowed, and then there is the interest, which is the amount, it's a percentage of the principal that you have to pay simply for having been lent the money. And these two components are added up over time, and the interest rate can be variable or it can stay stable throughout the years that you have your loan, depending on the loan as well as the duration of that loan. Loans are used for a lot of different reasons. There are auto loans, which are used for purchasing vehicles, such as a car or a truck for businesses. There are land purchases, such as mortgages, like if you want to buy a house for yourself, or if you want to buy a house in order to rent to other people, a side income. For medical procedures and bills, especially in the US, which are super high. There are also student loans and education loans for people who want to attend university. And finally, there are business loans that help students or individuals in general create their own businesses if that's something that they're interested in. So there are two different types of loans. There is secured loans and unsecured loans. And the main difference between the two is that secured loans have an asset that is collateral, meaning that if you are unable to make your payments, they can take the asset away from you. So an example of this is like a mortgage. When you use a mortgage to purchase a home, you sign a contract that says that if you fail to pay the money for the mortgage back, they have the right to seize the home from you in order to be able to sell the house and make back the money that they had borrowed from you. There are also unsecured loans, and here there are no collaterals. So for example, there are unsecured credit cards where if you fail to make your on-time payments, they really can't do anything about it, but you're just going to accrue interest until at some point you do have to pay that money back. So the main difference is that while one has an asset to seize, the other one does not. Now we want to talk about good debt versus bad debt, because there's often this common misconception that all debt is bad and you should absolutely avoid it at all costs. But like everything in finance, there are benefits and downsides to everything. So you need to think critically about this and see what situation applies to you. Sometimes taking out a loan can be more beneficial than paying the cost of something upfront. So for instance, many investors choose to take out debt in order to invest in real estate or purchase a home because they know that it makes much more sense to be paying a small interest rate on that money and take the rest of their money and invest it in higher or better investments rather than just paying everything up front. So in order to distinguish whether something is good debt or bad debt, you just have to ask yourself, will it end up making me more money in the long run, making up for the debt that I was in? So an example of bad debt is if you use your credit card to buy furniture for your new house and you don't have money to pay for that, you're going to accrue interest on that over the long term, and you can't ever sell the furniture for a higher price. And so you're essentially suffering a loss here and you're paying additional interest rate. And so that is an example of bad debt. Whereas examples of good debt are mortgages or student loans, because when you receive an education, you're much more likely to qualify for higher paying jobs that make up for the debt that you were in when you attended college. And finally, I'm going to touch a little bit on budgeting and how you can go about it and how you can update and maintain your budget over the long term. So essentially, a budget is an estimation of the expected revenue and expenses for a specified period of time. And in simple terms, it's basically a plan that you create for yourself in order to reach your financial goals and in order to be able to manage your money and see if you're spending it responsibly. Budgeting is important because number one, it reduces the risk of going into debt when economic disasters hit. So if you're not aware of where your money is going, or if you're not tracking it every month, chances are you're spending a lot of money unnecessarily, or you just don't have money saved in savings, emergency fund, investments. But by budgeting, you can create a specific amount of money every month to go towards an emergency fund or your investments. And so if one day you are in desperate need of an emergency fund, you know that you have that sitting in your bank account. It also helps you reach your financial goals. So if you want to save up for a mortgage, if you want to pay off your student loan debt, or if you just want to save up for like a concert that you want to attend to, depending on what your goal is, it helps you carefully plan to reach that goal. And finally, it prevents financial stress and strain. Again, if something bad happens, you have money saved and you're not totally freaking out saying, what do I do? And so here are a few steps that you can take if you want to create a budget. The first is you need to track your expenses and spending habit for a month. Chances are you're spending money on a lot of things that you don't need, but you're not even aware of it because you've never had a budget or you are not enforcing it. And so you're not sure where your money is going. So by becoming very clear on how you're spending money, where you're spending money, and where you could cut back, you can then use that information to build a budget that suits your needs and improves your financial responsibilities. So then after you've tracked your expenses, you need to calculate your disposable income. So you take your after-tax income and you subtract that by the essential expenses. So these are things that you need to pay for, such as transportation, food, rent, or anything else that is necessary depending on your lifestyle. And then you divide your disposable income into different spending categories. So you put it towards wants, needs, as well as saving and investing. And in order to keep track of your budget, you can use a paper and pencil. If that suits your needs, you can use an Excel sheet, or there are two apps on the screen, Mint and Buddy Easy Budgeting, which are things I've used in the past and our members at Empower Econ have also recommended. And finally, you need to check your budget and update it every few months, because as your lifestyle changes, so will your financial goals. And so a plan that you had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even a year ago is not going to be the same as the plan you have today. So as you pay off your debt or as you develop new financial goals, you need to be mindful of that and update your budget. And one way that you can do this is firstly, every week, maybe on a Sunday at night, you can go through everything that you spent that week, update your budget, and just clear everything so that you're not stacking everything to the end of the month. So when the time comes to kind of evaluate your budget, you have all of this information that you could go back to and assess. And this is one budgeting rule by Elizabeth Warren, and it's the 50-30-20 rule. So 50% goes towards your needs, 30% goes towards your wants, and 20% goes towards your savings. And this can be kind of a general rule that you can get started out with, but then you can tweak it to fit your specific needs. So maybe 1 month you want to cut back on your wants and you want to save as much as you can, or maybe right now you don't want to save because you have a very high interest rate debt and you want to pay that off as quickly as you can. So depending on your specific situation, you need to assess what works for you and apply that in your own scenario. And so that was my presentation about financial literacy. If you want to get involved with my team at Empower Econ, you can go to our page, Empower Econ, or our website, empowerecon.com. We currently actually have applications to join the team for different areas such as marketing, event planning, curriculum design, mentorship, and more. And you can also start an Empower Econ chapter in your city or your school if that is something that you're interested in.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was also wondering when you were talking about mutual funds, right? People also say that it is unsafe because we do not have a proper intermediary or somewhere like that. Like, we are actually could not define that what companies we are kind of taking the mutual funds. So how should we keep track of it, or how should we kind of check whether we are actually kind of working with the right people and the right resources in terms of mutual funds?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's also one of the concerns that people have when it comes to mutual funds. So before you start investing in anything, one thing that I would recommend is first searching up like the different banks or the different institutions that offer it. And there it can provide detailed insights into like the specific investments that their mutual funds have. How it's done, like the rates of return. And by analyzing that information and comparing it across like different institutions, you would first be able to make a decision of like what to invest in. But then in addition to that, when you actually have the mutual fund, even though it's like low maintenance and it's easy on your part, you should still keep track of like where the funds are going, how much fees you're paying. And the fees are also one thing that you should compare, because sometimes people find out that they're paying very high fees to their the person that's managing the fund. And because of that, they're actually not getting that much of a rate of return, and it's not a great investment for them. So I would totally recommend like looking into how much like fees you're paying over time and how it's being managed by your fund manager, so that you're not having like a greater loss through the investment, but rather you're benefiting through it.
So much for answering that question.
Does anyone else have questions?
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So what if I take up a credit card, I get a credit card from any of one of the banks, and I get myself up into for a certain amount of debt, and then I go to another bank and I get another credit card and use that to pay my other debt. Will that be legal, or like is that fine? Because I will be pretty happy, and the banks sure they'll be okay with it as long as their debts are being paid.
Well, I mean, when you get a credit card, you're not actually using your own money. It's like debt that you're taking out. So if you were in debt for one of your credit cards and then you use another credit card to pay that off, you're also in debt with that credit card. So you would need to pay it off with like a debit card, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but then can't a person just constantly keep on getting other credit cards from different banks and paying it to each other bank again and again?
Yeah, you can do that. And that's actually something that would impact your credit score, because when they determine like the length of your credit history, which is how long you've had your credit card for, if they add all of that together, they add all of your credit cards together. So if you've had one for 5 years, but then you open 5 new credit cards, they're going to add that together, and that decreases your length of credit history. So that would also drop your credit score.
Right. Okay. And I also have one other question. If you think about banks giving out loans to people, right? They essentially what they do is, if someone puts their money into saving, they use that same money to give loans out to another person. Isn't that kind of like a Ponzi scheme where you take money from one person, give it to another?
Yeah, that's kind of like the short selling I was talking about. But like what they do is because the bank doesn't generate like money of its own most of the time, it's typically the money that other people provide. And so the bank is also kind of in debt because of that money, and it's a constant cycle.
Okay, thank you.